Welcome back to the Swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that I haven't done in quite some time. This is one of my favorite all-time topics on the channel, and I'm glad to be getting back into it. Today we're going to be sharing some creepy and downright strange stories from small towns. As always, if you have a small town horror story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going on a daily basis. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and get ready for these creepy and downright strange small town horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. An Abandoned Town by Ivan X. To this day, I consider this to be one of the strangest things I have ever experienced in this lifetime. This happened a couple of years ago. My friends and I were heading to a music festival by Lake Okeechobee in Florida. We are from Miami, so the drive was pretty decent. The only issue is that we'd have to drive through Central Florida. These are, for the most part, secluded towns and swamp areas. Maybe an hour into the drive, my friend, who was in charge of the GPS, told us that there was an accident up ahead, which was going to add time to the drive. However, there was another route which is a little more secluded, so we wouldn't be stuck in traffic, at the very least. We agreed to take this secluded route since we always wanted to get to the festival on time and early enough to be able to secure our campsite and all that fun stuff. Once on this road, though, everything felt off. Like we had stepped into another time period altogether. It felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. There is no single car on sight, no landmarks, no mile indicators, just a road that spans for miles and miles of darkness surrounding us. Welcome to Central Florida, brother. Then, up ahead, we finally started to see buildings. All four of us sighed with relief. Nobody had said anything in the car, but I could tell we had all been tense or worried about this road trip. We entered this town, which I could only describe as a town straight out of the 1950s. It seemed like a movie set or something like that more than an actual town. But here's the worst part. Everything, absolutely everything was turned off. Mind you, it's different than when we passed by late at night. It must have been 9-ish latest. But every single light in this town was turned off. Cars were parked everywhere, but only some were out and about. And then, honestly, the driver of the car was saying, "Yo, what is going on? Where is everyone?" And I'm so glad I wasn't alone when this happened. I have other people who experienced this with me, and I still can't explain it. I wish I could have taken pictures of this place, but I promise you guys, it all seemed fake. Every single part of this town was empty, with old-timey police cars and all that kind of stuff, but nobody was inside any of them. It was like a ghost town, completely suspended in time. I know it's probably nothing supernatural, but it was creepy. My Creepy Walking Experience by Dapper Hunt 2171. Tonight I went on a walk with my dog. The same route, same time that I always do. I was walking my normal path, and this part of the walk happens to be the darkest part. There's an alley to the left that was absolutely no light. My dog was suddenly on high alert and was barking like crazy. I had my headphones in, but I knew something was wrong, and I looked down the alley but didn't see anything at first. When my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw a very tall, skinny man standing there. He didn't move. He was just facing me, staring from what I could tell. He was in all black. His pants and shirt were long, which is weird because it had to be 90 to 100 degrees all week. Not to mention it was 10:30 at night, and this man was wearing a giant black sun hat. I kind of froze and went, pretty loudly as I turned my headphones off so I could listen in. The man was standing there, saying absolutely nothing, and now I'm turning toward him but walking forward. After a second of him being silent and me trying to walk away, kind of chalking it up to a creepy but harmless encounter, he starts to follow me. This man followed me for about 2 to 3 minutes, saying absolutely nothing, just staring at me. When I felt like I could speak, I yelled out, My dog's going to freaking bite you. That seemed to scare him a bit because after he slowly started falling behind and then stopped following me entirely after about 30 seconds. He slowly went onto the sidewalk and went a different way. When he turned around to get away, he had a huge backpack on. It was extremely full. I have a really uneasy feeling about this. I go on this path in my small town almost every single night, and this man just so happens to be standing there in the darkest alley. There's been 3 women that have gone missing recently, and I kind of feel like maybe I'm putting dots that might not be there together, but maybe this has something to do with their disappearances. Small Town Creep by Anonymous. This happened many years ago when I was 15 years old. I'm also a female, if that means anything. I lived in a small Midwestern town that had very little crime, and I always felt pretty safe, even at nighttime. I lived just a few blocks away from downtown and would often walk or ride my bike there to pick up some soda, some candy, or on this particular evening, a pack of cigarettes. So, I get my cigarettes and started walking back home. By this time, it is starting to get dark out, but that doesn't really bother me. That is until I pass a cross street and a guy steps out from the shadows and starts following me. Even then, I wasn't really too terribly scared, just aware he was walking behind me and getting closer. I sped up a little and so did he. Pretty soon this guy is in like 3 or 4 steps behind me and asked me for a cigarette. Being a dub kid who was raised to be polite, I gave him one. Then he asked for a light and I gave him that too. Then I rapidly started walking away because this guy is starting to give me the absolute heebie-jeebies. He had long, greasy hair, and the way he looked at me made me feel very uncomfortable. It was like he was looking at his dinner plate and deciding what to eat first. So I'm skedaddling up the street, which is now going uphill when I hear the guy's footsteps starting to run towards me. I was already slightly out of breath from walking fast up this hill, and now I'll never be able to outrun this guy, so I just keep on walking and hope this guy will jog right past me. Nope. Next thing I know, the guy has grabbed me from behind with one arm around my waist, pinning both my arms to my sides, and then another around my neck. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was more mad. How dare he? I realize that we are on the residential street, so I tell the guy I'm going to start screaming my head off if he doesn't let go of me instantly. He hesitates for a moment, then lets me go and jogs further up the hill, disappearing behind a bush at the top of the hill. I cross the street to walk on the opposite side of the bushes he went behind and keep my eyes locked in those bushes all the way down the block. By now, I am the only other person on this street. I'm only another block away from home, and I break into an absolute sprint. Of course, I never told my parents about what happened because I was afraid of getting in trouble for smoking, and that they wouldn't let me be free anymore, if that means anything. Turns out that several weeks later, this guy grabbed another girl, beat and raped her. I didn't find this out until years later when I saw his picture in the paper for being on trial for I think it was his first attempt, and he got scared, and when I was being a little bit more, feisty than he expected, he just gave up. I'm so thankful that that's how this happened. A Farm Story by Anonymous. I had only met my grandfather once before we moved in. I think I was around 7 or so. I don't quite remember much from that time. When my mom and my dad passed away, I tried to take away that part of my life entirely. Eric and I were left with no other family but an aunt. She was living overseas, so Mom's dad was the only remaining option. Grandpa Mac lived on a 500-acre farm in the southeastern part of Montana. He had been raising sheep there since immigrating from Scotland in the 1930s. When we arrived, it was lambing time. Neither of us knew what to do. But Mac was a patient teacher. We caught on fast. We had no real choice, to be honest. Any day we had a little free time, Mac took us hunting or fishing. Season meant little to him. He'd follow most game laws, but if he saw a big buck, he'd take it. It was his land after all. Nobody was going to tell him what he could or could not do, as far as he was concerned. Pretty much as far as I know, we never really had any trouble. But this was in the 1960s. It may have helped us to be friends with the game warden. The initial spring was my first time ever seeing a grizzly. We'd run into one on our way up to the river. Even from 50 yards away, it was definitely scary, and the power that it held was evidence. Its size awed me. One quick swipe with its giant paws could have ripped a tree in half. No warning to stay away would be needed. Neither Eric nor I wanted any trouble from one of those monsters. Mac led us away down a new path. I wouldn't see another for almost 3 years. A hungry male had caught an ewe out on its own. When Mac found the body, he knew well what had to be done. He grabbed his rifle, and sadly he had to end his favorite horse, Penny's, life. I was left to guard the remaining flock while he was away. I drove the truck out into the pasture. Eric rode in the back with Mac's .30-30 as I patrolled the field. No more than 45 minutes passed and I caught sight of a grizzly ahead. I gunned it. We got about 50 or 60 yards away and I told Eric to shoot. The first shot hit him, but I think it only made him mad. He roared at us and I told Eric to keep on shooting. He dumped 5 or so more rounds into him before he fell. The great brute fought bravely but was no match for the Marlin's power. The beast may have appeared dead, but I told Eric to stay in the truck. We had not been watching for long when Mac came over the hill. He slowed as he got closer, watching the motionless bear himself. He dismounted and drew his Mauser from his sheath on the side of the horse's saddle. I held my breath as he inched closer to the beast. When he poked the bear with the rifle, he was within spitting distance. Once, twice, thrice, but nothing. The monster had been indeed slain. A 13-year-old boy had fallen one of Mother Nature's greatest predators. Once I was sure it was safe to breathe, I ran to the grizzly, Eric right behind. Mac's work-worn face wore a smile, the first and last I can remember ever seeing from him. "I'm not sure I believe it, but I surely see it. Well, you're sure a man now, boy." The remnant of a Scottish brogue bled through. Despite slight pangs of jealousy, I congratulated my little brother. Mac jestingly messed up his hair and shook his hand. If I had known this day would be a high point of our time with Mac, I perhaps would have savored it just a bit more. Since everything we did was a learning opportunity, Mac drew his knife and gave us a lesson on butchering grizzly in the field. The 3 of us carried the meat and hide back to the truck and tossed them into the bed. While Mac brought his horse into the stable, I drove the bear bits to the house. For most of that spring, we ate grizzly in every way possible. It is undoubtedly an acquired taste. I've had a coastal brown bear in Alaska before, and the flavor proved far too fishy for me. Our bear was much more to my palate. I don't think Eric liked it much, but you ate what you were given when you lived at Mac's. Besides, I think it made him proud to provide such a large kill for us to eat. Life would continue, much as it had through summer and into the winter. That year's winter was terrible. The blizzard of 1969 is still spoken of today around Montana. Things were tough, but Mac wasn't about to let a little snow beat him. We were all delighted to see that the thaw was finally arriving. Our hands were full with the lambing, but when we had some, Mac drove us out to the river for fishing. The trout were biting like crazy and we soon became separated. I never got the full story from him, but I believe he witnessed most of what happened. We all knew there were grizzlies in the area. Fish is one of their favorite food, and Eric and I had become accustomed to watching out for them by this time. I've no doubt that morning both creatures just stumbled upon one another. If you run into a female grizzly with her cubs in tow, she will attack. It's undoubtedly possible a fishing rod could look like a rifle to a bear. No matter what she was thinking, Eric never had a chance. Mac was the only one carrying a weapon, and it was already too late to do any good. He had only gotten off a few shots, but I think her having cubs, along with his aim being a bit wide, perhaps even then, he was reluctant to make those cubs orphans. Sure, Mac was definitely all torn up about what he had seen, but I don't think he blamed that sow for how she reacted. The water was much too loud for me to hear the attack. The gunshots were the first thing that got my attention, to be honest. The haunting wail that soon followed. That's when I knew something terrible had happened. When I reached the scene, Mac sat holding Eric in his arms, crying and moaning. Just the sight of this caused me to buckle. Soon I too was wailing and screaming, cursing God for taking my little brother. I begged and bargained. In the end, it made no difference. I had a large hole inside me for a long time, but Mac, I think he died that day. I don't recall much of the rest of that afternoon. Dark was coming on when the sheriff showed up at the house. Eric was laid out on the table. I greeted him and his deputies at the door. Mac sat silently at the table alongside Eric's battered body. I led them into the kitchen. The sheriff talked to Mac, paying his respects and the like. I don't think he heard a word of it. Once the sheriff saw the body for himself, any doubt he had was gone. He left us alone to grieve, but the outside world kept butting in. A new person was calling every minute, offering their condolences. A few of the surrounding farmers even showed up. All that pity quickly became suffocating. I tried my best to be courteous to everyone, but without Mac to help, I got overwhelmed. I finally just started asking folks to go away. Most were understanding. It would eventually get quiet around 10:30. I made for bed not long after. Before I did, I stuck my head into the kitchen and bid Mac goodnight. He was in the process of cleaning the mess from Eric's body. He didn't bother to answer. Briefly, I considered telling him to leave that to the funeral home, but reconsidered. He needed to do it, and I didn't want to take it away from him. In the days leading up to the funeral, little was said. Mac would speak, but it pained him. Things still got done, but I think it was more out of habit and necessity than desire. When the funeral came from Mac, I could tell Mac had a hard time letting go. He would spend all day in his room, occasionally talking. I would assume to Eric. Although the ranch hands didn't mind one bit picking up the slack, I was concerned for his sanity. For me, work and school were saving grace. It kept my mind off things. If I had sat and dwelled on things all day, I would have become unwound in short order. In my opinion, Mac let himself feel too much, too fast. Ultimately, this story may be more tragic than horrifying, but bear attacks, wild animal attacks, etc. are all very real, very terrifying, and happen all the time. I miss my brother every single day, but I can tell you something. I am not afraid of the woods, and I am not afraid of any bears. I run alongside them all the time, and try to co-inhabit. It's not their fault. We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and nature took its course. Before we start this first story, I just wanted to give you all a quick disclaimer that there are some notes of assault in this story, and if that is a trigger or bothers you, feel free to use the timestamps in the description or pinned comment to skip to the next story. This was back in the 1980s. I'm a female that was born in 1975, and I was born and raised in Virginia. When I was young, I was physically, mentally, and other ways abused by different members of my immediate family. We lived in a 2-story house, and my room was the only room with an AC unit in the window. My room closet was at the end of the attic that started in the laundry room on the bottom floor. This is how people got to me quickly. It came to the point that I would be so scared to sleep that I would put a butcher knife under my pillow, lock my bedroom door, and put heavy boxes in front of my closed closet door so I would be ready if somebody tried to attack me at night. One night, before my 10th birthday, I peacefully slept in my room. I heard my floor squeak, which it did only when someone walked on it. I sat up and clung to my knife to see who was there, but no one was there, and the doors were shut, and the boxes stood still. I clutched the knife and shortly fell back to sleep. A bit later I heard my floor again, but this time I had sunk into my covers and was scared to move. Something inside me felt a peace come over me, and I peeked over my covers. A man standing in front of me looked oddly like my dad, but was sober, glowing and smiling at me. He looked towards my bedroom door and put his hand on my bed, but I did not feel it. A strange feeling came over me, and I finally fell asleep again. I told my aunt about what I saw, and she didn't believe me. A few nights later, I was asleep again, but this time my door was opened because I had assumed I'd be okay because everyone was asleep before me. I remember waking up once as I slept because I heard someone come into my room. At about the same time, I closed my eyes and the man was standing next to me, almost holding me down, putting his finger to his lips as if to tell me to be quiet. I quickly felt at peace and fell back to sleep. The following day, the police asked me what I saw. Someone had broken into our house the night before. and according to the mud prints, they had walked into my room before leaving. They got away with all the money my parents had. When they found my dad's wallet and mom's purse, they also found a gun with 3 bullets inside. Was the man there to keep me safe? I barely remember July 10th's birthday. I remember my radio was thrown down the stairs, and I remember my cousins left early. She later told me I was poorly beaten until I was knocked unconscious. I remember that man caressing my head as I drifted to sleep. A little while later, I dreamt about a plane show, and a German World War II fighter was doing tricks, but something went wrong, and 103 people standing nearby were injured, and the pilot was killed in the crash. I told my dad about it, and he told me it must have been a movie I saw. The next day, we watched a plane show, and exactly what happened in my dream happened in real life. Both of us were amazed. In 1985, I was sent to live with a foster family while my family found help. They moved to Ohio but asked the judge if I could help care for the kids during the summer of 1987. I had a fantastic summer. The man returned to me a few nights before leaving but went quickly. I mentioned it to my foster mom, but she told me to pray the next time I saw him. The night before I was supposed to leave, we stayed with her parents in Michigan. The plane was supposed to leave the following day, routed to Newark, New Jersey, and then to Virginia State. In New Jersey, I would get off the plane and go to another to get back to Virginia. As I slept, I saw the man again. He played games, hugged me, and even showed me he likes to work puzzles. During the night, I dreamt that there was a plane that crashed and the 268 people on board were all killed. A 3-year-old little girl was the only survivor. Her grandmother and mom were driving on a back road when a wing flew off and hit them. The ladies were killed instantly, and so was everyone on board. My man suddenly changed his demeanor. He seemed more angry than sad, and started searching the rubble. I woke up in a sweat and told my foster mom what happened. She just told me to focus on the rumbling of the thunder and go back to sleep. I did. At 10 a.m., she woke me up and told me the storm had knocked out all the power in the neighborhood. My plane was scheduled at 8. As we drove to the airport, there was debris everywhere. They had white sheets covering up things they found all over the roads. There were way too many ambulances to count and police. I started to cry because it was too much stress to think about. I was 2 hours late for my plane, and there was death all around me. When we got to the airport, the manager on the floor grabbed my foster family and hurried us to a closed room. He explained that the flight was full, but one person didn't board me. He said my flight went up on time and then went down a few minutes later, killing everybody. The news never mentioned the storm, but my foster family knew it had happened. It was the only storm to hit this side of Michigan at that time. I told the man about my dream, and he said there was another crash he had gotten wind that a wing from the plane flew off and hit a family in a car on the side of the road. Before I boarded another flight, I learned only a 3-year-old girl survived. It was too devastating. I stayed with my dad and sister when I returned to Virginia. While there, she asked me to help her clean up the attic. This was the first time I'd ever been there, and I felt uneasy as I started picking up random old pictures off the floor. There he was. In the picture, my man was holding a baby girl in 1932. It was my aunt. I told my aunt this was my man, and she told me to see my grandma. My grandma looked at the photo for a while, then she told me about the firstborn girls on her side of the family who saw and felt things that no one else could understand. She also said to me that the man in the photo was her first husband, who was my dad's father. He died when I was 8 years old in Texas. She wondered if he was sent to me to help keep me safe when I needed it most. The last time I saw him was the end of May. I dreamt that my dad drank himself to death and he gave me a big hug and walked out towards a cemetery. I remember feeling very sad and lonely. 2 weeks later, my husband, aunt, and I found my dad in his living room dead, exactly the way in my dream. My aunt and I felt that there was someone or something else in that room with us. Later she told me that she felt as if someone had hugged her. I thought so too. And later, she told me she felt as if someone had hugged her. I thought so too. Finally, my grandfather and my dad were together again, and these are the moments in time I will not forget too easily. My grandmother was right. I know when someone is about to die, or when something's going to happen, and my oldest daughter has the same feelings. Thanks for listening to these creepy and downright strange small-town horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. As always, if you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to slap that like button as it helps me out a ton. The more likes this episode gets, the more YouTube promotes it, and that helps the swamp grow its ever-expanding waters. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new episode. I upload multiple episodes every single week, and all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, I'd love to see it. Be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. You can also submit them on Reddit at r/thedarkswamp. I'd love to see your story. I can't promise it would be featured, but I would still love to read it, and I do check out every single submission that comes through the swamp. If you're on the go but don't have YouTube Premium, but still want to download and listen to your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories no matter where you are, you can download them absolutely free from Spotify, from Apple Podcast, from Google Podcast, and just about everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. Thank you guys so much for supporting the swamp the way you do. I'll see you all very soon with another creepy episode.